Yeah, I guess so. Okay, I think we're ready to shift into our next theme. So we're going to move into the topic of housing support, and we first want to welcome Fran Hunt-Jinnouchi. Fran is the Executive Director of Aboriginal Coalition to End Homelessness Society, and she's here to speak on pathways to healing and recovery through Indigenous-led housing. Fran's also backed by popular demand from phase 1 of the summit. And Fran's right here. Come on up. I'll stand here awkwardly until you come.
Gela Kesla. Nugwan Zanau, Gaithlin Laka Witnagwisi Quagot Louis Guskimuch. Good morning, everyone. My English name is Fran Hunt-Jinnouchi. The elders in my community call me Zanau, which is roughly translated as a fast-moving little cloud. I want to first acknowledge the traditional territory of the Ta'an Quanchan Council and the Kwantlinden First Nation. Thank you so much for allowing me to walk and share on your territory. Thank you as well to Diane Smith, the elder, who opened our floor in a good way. Also to the Grand Chief Johnston. I was reading his foreword last night and I thought, right on the nail, rethinking our systems, because that's exactly the approach we have taken. Also to Yvonne Jack, thank you so much for sharing. It's wonderful to hear of other land-based healing, because land-based healing in our model really is the core component. What I hope I'll be able to convey to you is housing, yes, extremely important. It's a cornerstone, and we adhere to housing first principles, but it's much more, because the people we work with, the people I serve, are our city's highest risk, most vulnerable, unhoused. They're living rough or in shelters. And our other local Indigenous organizations that operate housing, they deal with affordable or low income. So the people that I work with would not be accepted in that housing. So, you know, I always think that I've got everything set and planned and I know what I'm going to share. But last night, Creator really spoke to my heart and said, no, you've got a couple of videos embedded through the presentation. You need to share the voices of the people you serve, that you support. So I've asked our tech people to please start with a video to help me to set the tone and to help you get a sense of what it is that we do. And this is from our first ever attempt at housing, and with our Priority 1 cohort. Priority 1 was the mayor's Priority 1 task force, where 74 people in our city were identified as the highest risk, most vulnerable. And there was a lengthy list that they had to make, and that was substance use, but heavy substance use and long-term. Chronic alcoholism, they will pass away if they don't have their alcohol daily. Mental health, violence, in and out of incarceration. They had to have a VAT score. VAT is an acronym for Vulnerability Assessment Tool. I don't know if that's used here, but they had to have a minimum of 25. We had people as high as 32. So but I'm going to follow my heart here and hope I can still fit everything in. And if you can just give me a sense of what time we're starting here so I can try to pace myself as well. 11:10, thank you. And so if you can play the priority 1 video, please. Indigenous people have a distinct collective experience because of contact and colonialism and the long-lasting legacy of things like residential school, 60s scoop, child welfare, Indian Act. It's had far-reaching implications that still impact people today. Healing hasn't occurred in a lot of cases. Families have been separated. People have been separated from their culture, their language, their spirituality, their sense of place.
I was in and out of shelters. Often the shelter would be full, so I'd often be outside. So yeah. That's where I was before.
It was pretty chaotic. A lot of prison time, a lot of being on the streets, a lot of addiction problems between alcohol and heroin and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's me and my girlfriend. We used to keep trying and trying for apartments, and there was no go.
How long have you been here?
Well, 5 or 6 months I've been living here.
And where do you think you would be without this?
I'd probably be homeless and still using drugs, still drinking and doing bad things.
Often you hear of us talked about as, a dispossessed people. And so what's different is we have a unique history. There really is somewhat of a collective consciousness that occurs, and we all have this longing and hunger and knowledge of something bigger as to who we are.
Well, what makes it different is the programs that are offered to us. Like, we got to make drums, we got to paint on paddles, we got to get out on a canoe. Basically, the programs that are going are working well for me, and it helps me reconnect with my heritage, and because I'm an artist and I'm starting to do artwork more again, and I get support from the program. Yeah, so it really helps me with carry on. Yeah.
I actually started to care about what I was putting into my body. They also have fresh fruits and vegetables and stuff that they give you every week. They have a place for you to eat downstairs if you don't have any food. You have a place to sleep. They give you a brand new bed to sleep in. I've never had a brand new bed before.
Well, in this program, they have a native elder come in once, twice a week, do lots of cooking, which I quite enjoy. Just the love that she brings with her, as well as the stories that Auntie Lo has to offer. Just her presence alone, Auntie Lo is, powerful. Just the aura, the energy.
Omens Numma. We are one. I work with people from North Island, from the Kwakwa speaking people, Nuchanuth, Coast Salish, we have Inuit, we have Métis. So when they come here, we have created a family space. This is our family room. I don't shake hands in this room. I hug. And I had one cohort family member finally tell me, he said, you know, Auntie Glo, when I used to come in here and you gave me a hug, he said, it made me uncomfortable. He said, because I wasn't used to that. He said, but now I like it.
Elders for the Aboriginal Coalition to seek out their knowledge and see what would be the best way to touch our hearts and get us to actually listen. You know, we respect what an elder says. It's all about respect, right? So if you have, for instance, a homeless person saying, hey, what would your elders think about what you're doing right now? Like if somebody says that to me, what would your granny think? You know, it'd make you think twice about what you were doing.
It just feels safe and supported, and they always help out, and I help out, and yeah, I think
the fact that I've made it this far is pretty amazing for me, so I look forward to getting back into my culture, to continue my drawing. I do lots of drawing and stuff. At the moment, it's the heroin that keeps me down, but I've been working the last 2 years to get off it, so I know what needs to be done and how to do it.
So you ask what's next? Well, I think I'd like people to understand that we are a lifeline, but to consider statistics from a shelter in the city of Victoria, so patterns of shelter use. Indigenous people account for 4.8% of the total population in our area, but they make up 31% of chronic shelter users. Wrap your mind around that, because it's alarming when you also consider that Indigenous people are the fastest growing population in this country, and the majority of us are under 25, not me, but Indigenous people are under the age of 25. What'll happen in the next 25 years? There isn't housing on reserve. My community, as an example, hasn't built a new house for a couple of decades. It's not unheard of to hear that people have been on housing wait lists in the communities for 15 years. So there are a number of things that have to happen. We want to provide that help. We want to do the research. We want to pilot programs that we can then bring that information forward to Indigenous communities, urban communities, and say, evidence-based information has told us this is what we need to do.
I think Fran.
There's a lot. This is complex work, as you all know. And I just need to situate myself. The sector of working with Indigenous people that are unhoused is not my area of knowledge. My work has been in Indigenous post-secondary education. I've worked for my community in post-secondary and was the inaugural director for the Office of Indigenous Affairs at the University of Victoria as the executive director for their office. And I took on a 4-month contract just to help in Victoria for them to engage with First Nations leaders and elders across the island. And that was supposed to be 4 months. Then it ended up 8 months, helped them to become a BC nonprofit and then a charity. And I left my great job with a pension to take on a job with no pension, but you know, I'm sure Yvonne and others know this comes from your heart. And in my first year, I just set about having talking circles with people who were unsheltered. And I just asked 3 questions. Where do you want to be in 3 years? What might prevent you from getting to where you want to be? What will support you? Vast amount of knowledge came through. Struggles with our local police was one big one. So we're now working very closely with the police and gender-based violence and Two-Spirit LGBTQ around safety. We have a 4-year research program. But I recognized my very first focus group when I sat down with everyone and I started to introduce myself, and I was just weeping from my gut, like I don't even remember ever doing. I couldn't even finish. And then I realized that all these years I buried in my own life. I was raised by my aunt and uncle and lost my own mom to the streets of the East Side. And to addictions and heroin like Chris, then into street work, and then she was murdered there. And it all came back. And as I was driving home that day, and I was just almost going, damn you, Creator. Like, okay, this is where you need me, okay. And so that's been my destiny and reason for continuing with this work. That was back in 2016. There was only myself as a worker and someone who worked 2 days a week to provide support. We now have 85 employees. We're operating housing, land-based healing, outreach. We'll be starting our Indigenous Community Justice Program in 2 weeks. But what I want to focus on is just a little bit about our dual model of housing care and what decolonized harm reduction looks like to us. And we see it as leading practice. And that's not because we created it or anything, but people are staying housed. People are starting on pathways to healing and recovery. And what we've really learned is, like Pavlov's hierarchy, housing first principles. If you can get them housed, feeling safe, secure, non-judgment, but take it that extra step. And so we now assess each individual based on their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual needs. They tell us. And that spiritual is left out of the Western models. So we're trying to align Western and Indigenous traditional approaches to health in our work. Our mission is to lovingly provide culturally supportive, affordable housing and services to end Aboriginal homelessness on Vancouver Island. We are governed by political leaders and elders from the 3 tribal groups on Vancouver Island, as well as Métis Nation BC. Our vision, and you saw Raven in the video, Raven designed our logo. So if you see our logo in anything, you know, and for when he said, this works for me, I'm able to refocus on my art. He's a brilliant artist. Our way is to care for all of our people, from the youngest to the oldest. We are all one. Some of our people living away from home are suffering, isolated, and homeless. We stand together to end homelessness. I won't go into the governance, I touched on that, but there's our board chair at the end. So our approach, unconditional love, that's the team we're trying to build. No one left behind. So if someone from one of our houses can't participate, then we do something on site. No one left behind. Doing our work with a good heart. And those teachings come from our long houses, our big houses, our grandparents, our moms and dads, what that really means. Creating a sense of belonging for the people we serve and the staff family that we're building. Non-judgment and walking in a good way. So the video you saw is where it all started for us, the Mayor's Priority 1 Task Force. The thread that tied them all together that I didn't mention is that they were banned from housing. Even though the housing providers didn't say it, it was very unspoken in that they weren't going to get housed. They were referred to as hard to house, a phrase we do not use. Because if someone is, in your opinion, hard to house, then you're doing something wrong. So how do you shift what it is you're doing, your approach? And it was a 3-year pilot project, and that's where it all began for me. I said, yes, we'll get involved, but you need to let us do it our way. I want to try to pilot culturally informed housing. So we need an elder, we need traditional foods, we need to start our day in prayer, and so on and so on. So midway through that 3 years, as per the proposal, I had to do a midterm review, and there were 3 lessons learned. You can't quantify love. How do you translate that into a report for the federal government? But you heard it from Chris as an example. Auntie Glow's presence, her aura, you know, what will my granny think? You cannot quantify love. After that is when our board changed our mission statement to include the word lovingly. And when we now recruit and hire people, that's what we're trying to get at. Is this a job for you? If so, wrong organization. We also learned about the unique situation of our women. And of course, it isn't new to us as First Nations, Indigenous people. You know, we all know of someone missing from our communities or violence, but we saw it firsthand how the women are groomed on the street, first by giving them drugs, getting them addicted, then get them working into street work, or when they get housing, begin to isolate them from their families and supports so they can be further manipulated. And we knew we had to get involved in supporting our women. Last, this again was one of those moments I had myself, like I did, you know, changing this format and showing the video first instead. I was feeling pretty good. Our data was like, whoa, second to none. People had stayed housed. Meanwhile, this cohort of 20 that we had to house, the workers from that non-Indigenous housing site, I remember one saying, oh, that's so-and-so, he'll last 3 weeks. We've tried to house him before. Others have tried to house him. There'll be holes in the walls, on and on. So imagine that's your approach in going into housing and how you're already looked at, how you're already assessed. What energy are you going to feel? But they were staying housed. So I had the report done, looking pretty good, feeling pretty good, and I just had to slap myself in the head. Because really, does a cultural space with a roof and you're warm and you have food really make a difference if you're still going to overdose or pass away from your chronic alcoholism? then we had to do some critical, I had to do some critical self-reflection. That's not enough. We needed to create pathways to healing and recovery for those that wanted it and when they were ready. So from there is when I started to build out and build the model. Am I missing it somehow? So one of the first things we did was to take some steps to address the needs of our women. And this was the first house we opened, called Spaken House, which means House of Flowers, named by the local elders. We incorporated a therapeutic garden. As our research has shown us, one of the central strengths of our housing is having that therapeutic garden. We also kind of tipped the BC Housing regular positions a bit on its head, in that, you know, they're called frontline support workers and this, that, the other thing. And we're like, we're trying to build family and community, family reunification. We need an anti-position. We need our elder, our granny, you know, because what is community when we're home in our villages? We're not like sitting across our house support worker. And so we just started to really have a slow but surely paradigm shift. Dialogue, language, labels, stigma matters. So we also then began to realize, or I really began to realize, that we can't be everything to everybody. If we try to, we'll do everything at 30 to 50%. And at that time, all of the opioid epidemic, the people passing away from overdose, it was on the news every single night and continues to be. But I started to question, why do we never hear about all of our people we're losing to the streets because of alcohol or non-beverage use like Lysol and all of those other things? Why is that never on the news? They're passing away into an ether, and so many times we don't even know who their families were. We don't even know who to get a hold of to say your loved one has passed. And so I decided we need to find out, how do we support them? What are the challenges? So right now we're one of 2 in Canada, Indigenous alcohol harm reduction residence programs. The other one is Ambrose Place in Edmonton, Alberta. Amazing work there. They house about 50 people. They worked with Alberta Health and mapped out 2 years prior to those people being housed in this program with cultural supports and integrated services. What was the cost to the Alberta Health for, you know, the paramedics, in and out of emergency, hospital, doctors, all of that? Then they mapped it out 2 years after they moved in. So 50 people. Do you know what the savings was to Alberta Health? $7.8 million. $7.8 million. That's not even including corrections or police and you know, if you looked at that, the costs. Imagine the cost savings and just the whole environment for businesses where people used to be outside panning and all of those conflicts. It's bad. Sometimes in Alberta, one of the people that they had in that house had been lit on fire, had to lose his leg. Like, it's this most vulnerable population of our people that I really want to emphasize are not just marginalized, they're doubly marginalized. And even our own communities are not responding. We have Indigenous housing in our city, but like I said, it's affordable or low income, because this is a complex job. But having the opportunity to lead it and do it our way, it can work. I really want to let you know it can work. So the Indigenous alcohol harm reduction, I should have mentioned too, we got a 3-year research grant from the Canadian Institute of Health Research. So we're in year 2 now. Year 1, we have amazing findings, lots of info and meat to help us form strategic directions. We were just one of 6 in BC awarded one of the rapid housing houses. There'll be, well, there actually are 45 units, but we said we need 2 because we need to continue the alcohol harm reduction, but we need detox. When our people are ready to go to detox, there's either no beds or there's no support to get them into detox to even prepare, and there is no support coming out the back door. So what do you think happens? Yeah, it's a revolving door. So there's nothing that is in place to then say, this is your moment. How can we help? How do we wrap ourselves around you and look at what your needs are, especially those that are still unhoused? So we got it. Our Island Health in Victoria is funding our first ever in our city and linked with housing an Indigenous detox. How we're doing it different is we have a team, a small but mighty team of 3 that are going to focus so much on pre-detox. How do we get Johnny ready? Talking with him, preparing. You know what you're going to go through with the withdrawals. How are you going to do with this? Should we get out on the land? Let's do some traditional healing. Do you need to go to your home community? We're preparing them before they go. Then, in collaboration with our elder in resident, they will determine what they want to see for supports, other than, of course, the physician and the nurse during the detox. Do they want the elder to sit in with them? Do they need someone 24 hours? Do they want to do a brushing or smudging in the morning? Do they want someone in there drumming? They have the control and the power. And then the case management, when they're done, will be no less than 30 days, but probably 90 days, where they'll be linked to a mentor, someone who's gone and is on the red path and has gone through this and can support them. It may require, they still need, this woman is going to be out on the land for 7 days, 4 days, 10 days, and we're bringing in other elder women and healers to help her be strong before she has to go back into the heart of darkness. That's how we begin to address and prevent and just the retention and helping them to strengthen. I'm going to not play this, and can you tell me how much time I have left? How much time do I have left? 28, 38, 48, so about 16 minutes. Okay, next slide, please. We may come back if there's time. So again, I just want to really emphasize Therapeutic Garden. When we started the housing, you know, BC Housing had European ornamental plants and all these wonderful plans. It's like, what? What good is that to us? We want a plum tree. We want some huckleberries or blackberries. We need traditional plants and medicines. And we just, you know, negotiated with them. And that has turned out to be the most amazing therapy for the women, to grow their own food, give it to the cook. Here they grew tobacco, was hung out all over the house. They bagged it up as gifts for ceremonial purposes. You know, it's so important to pass on traditional skills, a sense of purpose, strengthen Indigenous self-identity. With the sense of purpose, we are finding it opens that door where they're not so ashamed to reconnect with family and friends that they've been hiding from. that sense of purpose starts to give way to a sense of hope. That's when we start to see the change. Here's one fellow's quote: "For me, I have a choice. I can sit here and drink that beer or go for a walk, do something for myself, go work in the garden, do something." He's now a peer support worker, by the way, and he wouldn't really communicate with a lot of people, wouldn't participate in the culture, and now he is. Good. So we do a lot around traditional foods and traditional food processing, and we always make enough that they have stuff to give as gifts. It makes them feel no better than to share, because many of them, some have been without a home and on the streets for over 30 years. And here they are jarring fish. Our last land-based healing camp last week, they were out on a boat with New Channel people. The most exciting thing for them to come home with two coho salmon. Traditional skills building is really key, because it's through those processes and bringing the elders in that those conversations can take place. Like the skinning of the deer right in the downtown urban area of Victoria. I'm sure the neighbors were like, yikes, I hope that's not one of their people. But they were taught about the whole process, not just the food, but how we use that hide for our drum making, how we use the hoofs for our regalia when we dance, the shaking, how we use the antlers for our bone games. Nothing gets wasted. And when you bring the remains to bring it in prayer and thanks. And so all of that starts to play, you know, because when they're downtown, all they know is survival. All they know is, where am I going to get that next meal? Am I going to be able to panhandle enough to get my next fix or my next drink? That's it. And as one person said to me, I'm always cup in hand, either for money, for my addictions, or in the soup line. He said they've created a booklet for me called a survival guide, and it tells me what church mat I can go and sleep on Wednesday, where I could go shower, what food bank, this. He said, when in the F are they going to create a map or a survival guide that tells me how to get out of this maze? So important. We're part of the problem. So rethinking our systems, we think we're doing well. And yes, we do need food, and yes, we do need those things, but how do we support each one with their unique gifts and skills? Because we have found some that are master beaters, carvers, Raven, like I said, you know, our logo, beautiful art, gifted, gifts like any of us have that they have to offer and do not have those opportunities in shelters. So we've also, with our alcohol harm reduction, because what's set up is each person meets with their primary caregiver, our nurse, and we create their care plans, their risk management plans. So those are all different because everyone has a beverage of choice. So it might be that Bill gets 14 pours in the day. And for him not to go into the shakies and get violently ill, we have to start him at 1 at 5:30 in the morning, 1 at 8, so on and so on. But we're getting them stabilized. We're having lots of discussions with our elders and Knowledge Keepers Advisory Council, because this is not normal talk, Fran. Like, we don't allow people that are high to come into sacred ceremony. We don't, right? And we're having hard conversations. But what we do agree on, if not us, who? Are we seriously going to let them die on the street and not try? And if it's because alcohol right now is keeping them alive, like, you know, why can we give other medication? And so what we started to do is dabble in cannabis substitution. And we're seeing some really promising results. So we might take Bill and say, Bill, you have a 2 o'clock pour. Are you willing to have a joint instead? Let's try that for 3 weeks, you know, or maybe your stomach can't tolerate it, but so the one fellow I'm thinking of, the next one was, okay, he's doing the 2 o'clock, so now his bedtime, instead of having a drink, a joint or a gummy, that actually helps him sleep. So we've now had one fellow who has weaned off the alcohol, and cannabis is what's working for him. Of course, we still say and believe, well, that can't be healthy, smoking that much every day, you're right. But it certainly doesn't have the consequences on liver shutdown, kidney shutdown, watching people bleed out, you know, from sclerosis out of their nose and ears and anus, and it's a horrific way to go. We have to try. And as was said, rethinking our systems, rethinking our approaches. I added THC, and there's been times I've sat with the vodka at the table for an hour without even realizing, I forgot it was even there, right? It works. So if you combine spreading out the booze and some THC in the middle there, for me, that works. Doesn't work for everyone. Go ahead. Elder support, critical. And we have elders in all of our houses, in our land-based healing. Go ahead, sir. In relation to staff, this was a person in the first year research telling me that they are glad that I'm here and stuff like that. Like some of the family members and some of the staff that I talk to quite a lot, you know, that feels welcoming. Just somebody to talk to, you know, without having to be in a serious crisis or having a problem. And so that whole building family and community, we don't refer to any of the people we house as tenants or clients. They're family members, because psychologically what that says to them, but as importantly what it says to my staff, would you give up on your family member that quick, or would you go till their very last breath? And you have to understand, these people that we work with, we are 99% going to be their last place on earth. So you have to be prepared to go that extra mile, despite it being really, really hard at times. Building community, this is just some recent work with our Victoria Police Department. That's a whole other story. Love to share the work we're doing there, especially with Two-Spirit, LGBTQ, trans and housing and all the challenges. I will just quickly touch on this though. We've had one-on-one and group contacts. This is our first year to move into Indigenous youth that are unhoused. But we know, how can we have this title to end, you know, homelessness on Vancouver Island? But as fast as we're working, our youth are aging out of foster care. Many, you know, beelining to the streets. But the surveys that we did with those youth, 43% of those youth self-identified as Two-Spirit LGBTQ. The national average for that age category is under 6%. So again, step back. Whoa, what are we dealing with here? How do we respond correctly? How do we hear from their voices to build? So my suggestion really is, don't build it and, you know, with something set in mind, but be prepared to humble yourself and say, I'm going to build. I'll provide a foundation, but I'm going to build, pivot, modify based on their voices. They're the experts, not me. And it's been from the feedback that we get from the participants that we then add or take away supports that we thought were helpful. I didn't know who I was and I didn't have an identity, so it was helpful to be around First Nations elders and staff. It made me feel some pride. I guess to get out of my other part of my different masks that I wore on the street, it was important to me, I think, to find my voice. Next one. Think if you're going to get into housing, family reunification is key, and we're really finding that with the women. High substance use. Maybe out of the 21, we have 3 or 4 that have the alcohol challenges. The rest are high use. But we were able to negotiate with BC Housing a family townhouse for a family reunification program. So we help them to navigate with the ministry so that they can have visits with their children in the home. We've now been able to work that out so that there are overnights, but the change in the women, we hear the women start to say, I gotta get clean, I can't use, I can't drink, help me, how can I do this before my kids come? Now we're hearing them at the back end of it. They don't want their kids to go. It's like, I need to get it together. I need to go back to school. I need to get my own place. You know, that is so major. It may not seem like it. Those were not even thoughts in their minds before they moved into the housing. As I said, it was survival and the next hit. So I want to just highlight Jack, and I'm sure I'm out of time, right? So I'm going to highlight Jack because Jack it's beautiful because of our land-based healing. So Jack was homeless for over 30 years, and he was supposed to move into our Priority 1 program. He said, I can't. So he has such severe PTSD, he wouldn't even be able to stand. He'd have to stand like here, back to the wall, you know, just fight or flight at all times. He's had one cubby in the downtown Victoria that he sleeps, he pans, he drinks. That's been his life. When we started the alcohol harm reduction program, he came into that program. And he started to kind of relax a bit and feel safe. He went on a land-based healing to northern Vancouver Island. He was in a swing, a tree swing. The rope busted and fell down, and the nurse was like, oh my gosh, because sometimes Jack could get grouchy really easy. And they're waiting, and he stood up and he said, that's my sign. Creator just gave me my sign. Everything that tied me down in Victoria, I'm free. I'm free. And on that long road trip back, 7 hours, he began to ask, I've got to go to treatment. He went to treatment right away. We never brought him back to the house. We didn't want to do that. We got him into treatment. We picked him up from treatment. Didn't want to bring him back to the alcohol harm reduction house. Somehow, I don't even remember how, managed to get the money to get a hotel room for him for 2 weeks. You have to capitalize on every minute. Every situation is unique. And we were able to transition him over 2 years now, independent housing, the first home he's had, and he's still housed. That's how Creator works. That's how the land works. And so we now work with the people that have been in our housing, and we're doing peer training. We need these ones that are showing some steps, and we want to encourage them, but we're encouraging them by becoming the peers to the others in the housing. This was our kind of ceremony at the end. Sorry, I'll really fly through. Remember I said midway, I had to look at Can't Quantify Love, Women. The other one was Pathways to Healing and Recovery. It was harm reduction. So back then in 2018, called elders, knowledge keepers, medicine keepers together from all across the island and asked the question, what does harm reduction mean to you? They're like, nothing, that's not our language. Why are you even talking, using that language? And was reminded who I am as a Native woman, and it really boils down to how are we helping our people? How do we make sure no one is left out, right? But from that 2.5-day session, they're the ones that told us, develop a healing house, align traditional and Western models, pilot and implement the alcohol harm reduction, establish island-wide healing communities, and provide culturally supportive housing. We've done all, or in the process of doing all, and we're now working on opening our healing house, our wellness house. But what they said was all of our communities have different healing practices that are needed here. Bring the people out of the downtown core, the exhaust, the pavement, the noise, and bring them into our communities. Connect with us and our people. We all have our healing practices. We will provide that. So that's what we do. We connect with the communities, we give them the dates, we say we will pay for the elders. You give us the theme, what it is you're gonna do. We're only the vessel to bring people to the communities, and it's just amazing. Okay. Yeah, I won't go into that. I don't want to go into someone else's time, land-based. So I'm just going to close with this. I think it's 2 minutes, and this is the first pilot of our land-based healing. And a fellow was on the van heading home, and someone noticed he had been scribbling, and he has anxiety, all kinds of things, but he was scribbling, and he put the piece of paper down, and one of the workers saw it and just thought, you know, that's powerful. So we asked him if he would narrate it, and we would put some pictures from that first trip. So this is his voice. Thank you in advance. Sorry if I went a little too long, but we'll show that video.
I found this First Nation retreat heavenly. You know, being at Victoria was like being in a concrete jungle. I found it very meaningful to be around my First Nations people. It was truly exhilarating and freeing. Being with my people, I don't have to be this or that, just be myself. I'm hoping I will get some healing through my people to express myself freely. Due to childhood hurt, I've lost my sense of self. More than anything, I want to express my feelings in a crowd of people.